There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamma Mia podcast.
Mamma Mia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. It's the 23rd of September 1979, and a cabin cruiser known as the Nocturne is cruising through deep blue waters just off the far north coast of New South Wales. It's a near perfect day for the 5 passengers on board. A light nor'easter is blowing, and the sun is glistening off the boat's sleek white hull. But as the day wears on, conditions begin to change. Clouds form on the horizon, but the Nocturne presses on with its voyage. As night falls, the warm breeze of the day disappears, replaced by the icy chill of a southerly buster. The winds pick up speed, 20 knots, 40 knots, 60 knots. That white hull that had been shining in the sun just hours earlier was now being beaten by unrelenting 10-metre high seas. A rogue wave smashes through one of the boat's windows, flooding the interior. Moments later, the engines fail. As the boat begins to sink, the passengers have no choice but to abandon ship. Of the 5 people on board that night, only 3 would make it back to shore. What happened to those lost at sea remains a mystery that will only be unravelled 32 years later when a badly weathered bone fragment washes ashore at Kingscliff Beach. I'm Claire Murphy, and this is True Crime Conversations, a Mamma Mia podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Walkley Award-winning investigative journalist Adam Shand about Billy Moran, who was lost at sea in 1979. So, Adam, can you take us to Kingscliff Beach? It's the 24th of September 2011. What's it like on Kingscliff Beach that day, and what do they find? Who is on the beach that day?
Well, there's just the normal sort of passers-by and beachgoers that are there, and one of them comes across a fragment of a jawbone in the sand, badly weathered, and they know it's not the remnants of a barbecue or some other thing. It's actually a human jawbone. It's unmistakable. So they make the call, and it's assumed that this jawbone is from a long, long time ago, and it was, of course, but longer than people thought.
What was done at the time to try and figure out who this jawbone belonged to and how old it actually was?
Well, the good thing about the jawbone was there was enough DNA there to get a decent sample to test. But the problem was that police can only access offenders' databases for DNA or volunteers or suspects for a short period of time. So they have a very small number of potential matches, databases available to them. So there was no match at that time.
Did they have any suspects, though, at the time, Adam? Was there anyone on their list of potential victims that this could have belonged to?
Oh, look, there's always missing boaties from years past or other marine disasters. There was a plane that went down there not so long before. But all these things get eliminated, and science just simply had not advanced enough so there could be a result. So this more or less sat there for about 9 years until the New South Wales Health Pathology, Forensic and Analytical Science Service now used some updated technology, to put it simply, and they got a match. And this came with an inmate database there in Goulburn, where a young offender, he was in there, had the test, and he linked to the DNA in the jawbone. And this was a particular kind of technique called YSTR, which gives you a very good link to male relatives, not just brother, father, but often cousins and even further. So you can pick up that male line, and then using the mitochondrial line, which includes the female side, you can build a picture. So this is what they did. And they went to see this young man in jail, and he said, This is interesting. I think my uncle was involved in a boating disaster back in 1979 around that spot. And this turned out to be the case, and an extraordinary story developed out of there.
So investigators now have a potential match. This young man's uncle, who he names as William or Bill Moran, and with further searches are able to find the headstone of a Philippa Moran, which mentions Bill and the name of a boat that had sunk in an incident that they were both involved in. What were they then able to then determine about Bill and this incident?
Well, his family had bought the boat, Nocturne, in 1979, and they were sailing it down from Brisbane, where they bought it, down to Nelson Bay near Newcastle. And Billy hadn't had much experience. He was doing his bosun's ticket at the time, so he wasn't able to take the boat down himself. So he had to have a skipper with him, and this was a very experienced skipper, supposedly, and they were making a bit of a trip of it. He brought his new wife, Philippa, and there was also another Moran family, there was the sister of Philippa, Maria, and her husband, and they were having this wonderful trip down the coast. The weather forecast supposedly was good, but what they didn't realise, there was something nasty over the horizon. There was a southerly buster coming up off Bass Strait, and the local weather reports didn't pick it up. They could have picked up the reports from further afield, but they didn't. And they were taking this pretty small launch into the teeth of a very serious tempest. And anyone who's sailed those waters, particularly the shallow waters, it can stand up on you very, very quickly. And this boat was just not equipped for it. So they had a chance. As they were coming across the border into New South Wales, they could have turned right for Evans Head, chose not to. That was a fatal mistake.
And hindsight revealed another fatal mistake in that Fred Markwell, the skipper, had delayed the trip because the boat had needed some small repairs. The weather leading up to their departure had been clear, so it's sad to think what might have been if they'd left their dock according to their original plan. When they realised they were getting into dire straits, because for people who are not from New South Wales who haven't heard the term southerly buster, it can be a very strong weather pattern that brings really strong winds and really turbulent surf. Was this skipper qualified to get them through something like that? How did he handle this weather system?
Oh, he was well and truly a very experienced sailor. He was actually a yachtsman. He'd been head of the cruising yacht club up there. He had plenty of experience in ocean racing. He knew the waters. But sometimes a little bit of overconfidence can come with that sort of experience. He had spent some time making sure the boat was safe and there was some extra work that delayed them. But really, his big mistake was not looking into the weather patterns, which were available to him. And also to make the mistake of thinking, well, I won't go into port when he had the chance. That chance disappeared. His only hope was then to take the vessel into deeper waters where the swells wouldn't be quite so treacherous. But of course, getting further and further away from shore has its own dangers. And during one of these big waves, the radio mast was taken down, so their ability to communicate was severely limited. And in fact, Ray and Bill had to put the radio mast back up, re-rig the radio, but they couldn't get the speaker to work. So they had Philippa and Maria sending out the SOS signals all through the night and not sure if anybody was hearing them.
Well, had more or less given up. Ray Moran remembers the skipper was crouched in the corner, asleep or uncommunicative. He was out of answers and at the mercy of the elements and his own misstep.
Fortunately, there was a lighthouse keeper further south who did hear the SOS call and put out the call to the water police. And there in Coffs Harbour was Paul Scruff Craggs, who was he's a legendary water policeman based out of Coffs Harbour, and he was the one that went out looking for them. When all the boats are coming in, there he is going out in his little steel boat into this turbulence. A terrible, terrible surf was running. He'd never seen anything like it. And he's following the sound of voices, which are still broadcasting, Philip and Maria saying, SOS, Nocturne, we're 10 miles off Evans Head. That position was not right. So Paul continues to follow this signal until it disappears. When he's on top of the wave, he's still getting a sonar. So he reports that position and then turns in back to port. He thinks this is all over. He's in a state of depression because he hasn't managed to find the people and they will perish. And he's feeling this is on his shoulders. But then he hears over the radio that the Orion surveillance aircraft has found them. using the coordinates that he'd given them. So it was a great moment. And from there, Ray tells the story of seeing the Orion pilot come in so low he could see the pilot's face and wave to him.
You mentioned that the position the women were broadcasting as their current location probably wasn't right. Why was that?
Well, I think the skipper got it wrong. He probably got it wrong by a couple of miles. And a couple of miles is huge in an open surf like that. So Paul was going towards the position that he thought was correct, but it wasn't. So he found nothing. And it was just a couple of miles further out, a couple of nautical miles further out, where the castaways actually were. So Mark Well's performance was less than exemplary, typified by the fact that he actually abandoned them. He took a bunch of ropes with him and paddled off towards some more debris and was more intent on saving himself than Ray and Maria, which I think always rankled.
So when they did find the survivors, they were no longer on the Nocturne, it had sunk. What happened in that time between when Philippa and Maria were making those Mayday calls to when they were found?
By the morning, the boat was down. They were all in the dinghy, 5 of them, including the skipper, and they had to make some decisions. And the skipper abandoned them, leaving the 4 of them to their fate. And it was up to Bill and Ray to save their wives and the wives to save them. And in the end, they were separated. The last that Ray and Maria saw was Bill and Pippa still in the dinghy, paddling furiously, getting drawn further and further away from them. And they assumed, well, they're in the boat, they're more likely to survive than we are, but it turned out not to be the case.
Why didn't they stay in the dinghy? Wouldn't that have been more of an idea of getting saved if you were able to stay in something that was floating?
Well, you're right. That sounds like it would be, wouldn't it? But the dinghy is just a little steel dinghy. It's not meant for 5 people in the first place. And the very first wave that came tipped them over. So they were all in the ocean then. And they were clinging to the ribs of the dinghy, the seams on the outside. And they could only do that for so long. It was actually much better to find something that was a flotation device of some degree, like this debris, whereas Bill decided that the dinghy was going to be his salvation and spent a lot of energy turning it back over again and getting himself and Philippa in the dinghy. And there's this one moment where they've got the dinghy, upright, but Maria is swept away and Ray's now faced with a terrible decision. Does he go to safety in the dinghy or does he go to his wife? And of course he goes to his wife. And they felt that that was their fate, that they would perish, and that they were more or less waving Pip and Bill goodbye and saying, well, we can't survive, but you can. And, it was a very sad moment, but it turned out that the dinghy was not the safe place because it was so hard to keep it upright and so hard in these huge waves to prevent it being swamped again and taken to the bottom. In the end, the dinghy did float up onto the beach, and there was a rope attached to it, and it's believed that Bill might have attached Philippa to that rope, and that was his last chance to kind of keep her safe. We don't know what his fate was, but it seems that his body was brought very close into shore and broke up and decomposed somewhere offshore and has been really moving around in that small space for 41 years.
Unlike Philippa and Bill, Ray and Maria were found alive. How were they rescued in those conditions?
Sir Angus Houston was then a RAAF pilot based out of Amberley, and he was flying the helicopters there, and he came in and he plucked them out of the ocean in his helicopter. And it was a great thing actually to interview Sir Angus Houston, who's now retired. He was the head of army and so forth, and he's retired now. And he said, I always wondered what happened to Bill. I said, Sir Angus, I can tell you what happened to Bill. His remains have been found. And for him, it was a great closure because there was always that concern. Did they look far enough? Did they miss them in the surf? Was there something else they could have done? But the problem is you've only got so much fuel and you can't be over the ocean for too long on those little helicopters. So he could only do as much as he could. So they had to eventually break off the search and head back into base.
When you said the rescue boat headed out to try and locate them that first time, considering the weather and the sea conditions in that moment, even if they had found them in the place where they thought they were, would they have been able to rescue them? They were barely able to sit in a dinghy for more than a minute. A big rescue boat, I imagine, would have been perilous in those conditions if you were in the water.
Well, just getting alongside somebody in the water in those conditions, you could damage or even kill them by bashing them up against the boat. You just simply could not safely get people on board that boat. It had to be a helicopter rescue. And so the water police boat was all about finding the location, sending those coordinates to the Orion Air Force surveillance plane that was looking for them on top. And that's exactly what happened. It was actually a textbook operation. And I was just amazed at the bravery of these guys, Paul Craggs and his mate who went out there. Men of steel, boats of wood, unbelievable people. And, they just go and do their jobs. And, Paul continued on for many, many years in the water police. And, he suffered PTSD, not from that rescue, but from so many others where, pulling kids out of the water, young people, boating disasters, you name it. And the dedication of those guys who go out there when everybody else is coming in. You imagine that, how much fear you'd have. And they go out there and they do their duty. And they do it on a public servant's wage. And I've just got great admiration for them.
Well, after they do go back into shore after doing their best to try and find them, they do send out the air support. So Angus Houston is in the chopper with his offsider. Who is the first person they actually come across in the water?
Well, the skipper, Fred Markwell, the blessed skipper who's abandoned everybody else. So they pluck him out of the water, and that's when Ray and Maria discover that Markwell's still alive, and they're a bit amused at that, given he'd abandoned them. They were hoping it might have been Bill. So they had to grab them one at a time. And Maria was very stressed and anxious, and she was sort of lashing out at the rescuer. It was a very tense moment. A lot of bad things can happen within a few feet of the water in those sort of rescues.
How far away had Markwell been from Ray and Maria in the water when they picked him up? Because obviously they couldn't see much in those conditions.
No, they were all on the waterline, basically bobbing up and down with these huge breakers and these huge swells. And he was probably only a couple hundred meters away. He drifted away on some other debris and was happily, waiting for rescue, I guess. And he was lucky to be rescued as well, because he was the architect of this disaster. And at the end, when they were in the hospital, Markwell comes up to Ray and says, "Oh, well, I had to get away because your wife was going hysterical." And Ray had to restrain himself from doing something physical and violent to Markwell. But to cap it off, the Moran family said he tried to sue them for his tools that he lost.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So how long had Ray and Maria actually been in the water by the time the helicopter got to them?
They'd been in the water for hours, from before dawn until after 9 o'clock. And they can't really remember the exact times anyway, because it was such a blur and it seemed a long time to them, you can imagine. And there was a shark circling around as well, because there was so much food in the boat that was now in the water. So the sharks were coming in, including one big fellow who was very, very curious. So they were extremely happy to be hoisted out of that water, that's for sure.
Now, I know that Ray and Maria were wearing life jackets at the time, and most people would think a life jacket would keep you afloat for that time, but we're talking life jackets in 1979. What did Ray say was happening to his life jacket as they were trying to stay alive?
Listen, back in the day, those sort of life jackets became saturated after 2 or 3 hours, and they would eventually just pull you under. So they're much more dense these days and much more water resistant. So, it's a much safer option now. But I think even then they were old life jackets, and it really, any mariner who goes out there, make sure you've got the up-to-date equipment, because you may need it. This is a classic example for those who are complacent about the dangers. So, those life jackets would have drowned them eventually.
So Ray, Maria and Fred get taken back to shore via helicopter. How long until they find out that Pip has actually not made it?
They get back to the hospital and then they're informed. And all they want to do is get back out there and search for Pip and Bill. And they go up in a light plane the next day searching, and they can just see nothing, a little bit of debris from the boat, and there's just nothing. It wasn't until days later that Pippa's body washed up on Kingscliff Beach, not that far away from where the jawbone would eventually wash up 41 years later.
It was the same beach, but what was significant about the date that Bill's jawbone was actually found on that beach so many years later?
Yes, it was the very same day as the disaster had occurred all those years before. So it was this very strange anniversary of this tragedy and its resolution. The connection between these dates, absolutely remarkable. And the detective who worked on this was just amazed when she saw that coincidence, in fact. Yeah.
How did the family receive finally getting this information that was Bill and that they now knew his fate?
It's very tough because there's always that little ray of hope that he survived somehow, went off to some other life, living on an island, all this sort of stuff. You always hear this every time there's a disappearance. But this was the end of a chapter for them, that's for sure. And, the Moran family has undergone a fair bit of tragedy since as well. I won't go into that. So this was a little bit of something, a little sense that this chapter was over, that they could bury Bill and they knew what his fate was. I mean, I think it was sad when you see a grave lost at sea, no knowledge of his fate. At least now they had something to bury. And it's not inconceivable that other bones may be found in the future as well. But at least there was something to bury and they could move on with life. I spent a fair bit of time with Martin Moran, who was Billy's brother. And Marty was sort of kicking himself because he was like, oh, I was supposed to go on that trip, but I wasn't sure about it. I didn't think it was safe. So I didn't go. And if I was there, things would have been different and all that sort of having time over stuff, which is not particularly helpful to people. But, tragedy strikes families in different ways. And I think this was a big moment, obviously, for the Moran family because they were planning this other life. They'd been in rodeos and farming and horses for years and years. And this was a big change. They were going to go down to Nelson Bay, start a new life with a charter service with this boat. And that all kind of came to a quick close when Bill disappeared.
You're listening to True Crime Conversations with me, Claire Murphy. I'm speaking with investigative journalist and podcaster Adam Shand about the Nocturne tragedy that took the lives of 2 passengers back in 1979. Now, there was a coronial inquest into this disaster in 1980 where Fred Markwell, the skipper, actually gave evidence. And from listening back to the story, you can't help feel that he was very responsible for this accident. But what did that inquest find?
So many decisions get taken on the high seas in a split second. They're analysed at leisure and length in the coroner's court. And I think it was beyond the knowledge of the coroner to make a finding. And back in the day, it tended to be misadventure. Accident was usually how this was attributed. There wasn't malicious intent. You can make a mistake on the high seas and not be culpable, as it were. And that was a source of frustration for the Moran family, both Moran families. But I think at the same time, I think you've got to give someone the benefit of the doubt. You can make a mistake and not be malicious, trying to cause injury, trying to cause death. So, I mean, as emotional as these issues are, they just lack the hard evidence to make that sort of a call.
Now, it seems quite incredulous that someone can drown off a beach in 1979 and their jawbone wash up in 2011. Has there been an explanation as to how Bill's body could have remained so close to the site where they would have gone under?
No, in a word, but the sea's a very mysterious and changeable place. I mean, there was a body washed up just recently off the Central Coast, which had been in the water for 4 months, and it was virtually intact except missing its head. And normally these things get eaten away pretty quickly. It could well be that he was trapped under a coral reef or under rocks, and the predation was a lot slower, but yeah, it's hard to say, very difficult to say that one, but it just goes to show to me, and I've got a number of cases like this where bodies have never turned up and there's a sense that they never will, but I always say, but Bill came back. So there's always a chance, which I think should give people some hope.
You have sat down with Maria and Ray and spoken to them about what went down that day. Are they still influenced by that experience in their life? When they retold this story to you, did they feel like they'd gotten that closure now and that they could move on, or is that still really impacting them now?
Well, I just think the main thing is that Maria always recognises that Ray is her hero and a terrific guy with great courage and fibre. And they've stayed together. They've got a beautiful family and they're living the life that Bill and Philippa couldn't have. So that's how it affects them. And their family, I think there was a very emotional experience to go through this because our editor, Matt Nikolic, did an amazing job in recreating the feel and the atmosphere on that boat. And so I think it was pretty harrowing for them, but I think they really appreciated the efforts of New South Wales Police and the coroner and all the scientific team that actually put this together. And they felt that their family was being taken seriously and that they weren't just an old case that no one cared about. So the officers involved, Kelly Vaness, who was the officer in charge at the Water Police, did an incredible job. I mean, I just was amazed at how thorough this work was and how fast it was done. So pretty good investigation.
Just finally, New South Wales Police used this case as a catalyst for other people to come forward, because that jawbone isn't the only remains sitting in an archive somewhere waiting for a DNA match to come along.
Oh, yeah.
They're hoping for a result in all of those cases, right?
Well, in fact, Lost at Sea 2, The Black Bone, is another jawbone that washed up on Umina Beach in June 2020. This is a sequel to the story. And it's a black jawbone. It's so strange. Why would it be black when it's come out of yellow sand? And we're 3 episodes into this story now. And what's emerging is this jawbone came from somewhere up the Hawkesbury in a massive flood in about 2012, where Warragamba Dam opened up and all this debris was floated down onto the beaches. And that's how it got there. So we're now involved in the sequel, where we're working with Gosford detectives to work out the possible scenarios here, why this jawbone was there. And we're currently, our forensic odontologist, it's like a fancy word for a very smart dentist, has identified that there was some extractions from this jaw which indicated a lower socioeconomic background, possibly Indigenous or mixed Indigenous, and no one has reported this kid, 14-year-old boy, we believe, no one's reported him missing. So there's definitely a call out to the public, put your DNA on record, particularly if you've got connection to a missing person, distant cousin, whatever, make that sample, give that sample, and you could be helping solve a case, like including this one. Because currently you can't link up with the Ancestry commercial database, where if that was the case, we'd solve everything. It wouldn't be a problem. But we're still limited to that inmate database and the volunteers and so forth. So the more people come forward and take this seriously, particularly where the DNA's got to the stage where both sides, the male and the female, can be searched very successfully and to quite distant lengths. So I think from next year and the year after, it's kind of going to be the era where there's no secrets anymore. There's about 400 pieces of unidentified human remains, not full skeletons, but pieces or full skeletons. And there's a number that just really baffle police, that just have no narrative to connect them. It is the science, it's the dentistry, it's the hair, it's the eyes, it's whatever they can match. And as I say, I think science is catching up on this very quickly. And I think that should also be some people out there who may have committed offences, and they should be very nervous now because the scientists are closing in and the police are not far behind.
Thanks to Adam Shand for assisting us to tell this story. If you'd like to learn more about this case, take a listen to Adam's podcast Lost at Sea, which has provided the supporting audio for our episode today. This episode of True Crime Conversations was hosted and produced by me, Claire Murphy, and my executive producer, Gia Moylan. If you have a case you'd like us to cover next, you can email us at truecrime@mamamia.com.au or join our online community. Just search True Crime Conversations on Facebook and make a request to join.